All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin with a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. Sorry. Talmud Torah sponsors, I'm sorry. Yes, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Shirman Drashos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah Ben Zechariah and Dinah Bas Reb Dov. To thank Art and Sherry Miller for dedicating all the Shirman Drashos this month in loving memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven Ben Betzalel V'Rachel, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsor, Barbara Markowitz, in honor of the birthday of her dear son Yisroel. So sweet. Mazel tov to Rabbi Yisroel Markowitz. Ad mea ve'esim shanim tovos. So also with that, let us begin. So today's daf is daf Zayin. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Vav Amud Beis 6b. So we actually left off, 6b. So we actually left off Bahar Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So we'll say it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 15 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, remember again, first of all, we're embedded in the middle of the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which is the Machlokes already that began in the Mishnah, specifically focused on the value of the Olas Re'iyah versus the Shalmei Chagigah. Right? Remember again, we have 3 different types of karbanos that are brought on Yom Tiv that we saw in yesterday's daf already. Shalosh mitzvos. There's an Olas Re'iyah and Olah. And although which is fully consumed on the Mizbeach, there is Shalmei Chagigah, a shlamim, that you have to bring shlamim again. Remember, part of it burned to the Mizbeach, part of it goes to the Kohen, and part of it consumed by the owners. And then, of course, there's what's called Shalmei Simcha. Shalmei Simcha, as we're going to see more in today's daf, are really, again, there if you need meat or you want meat over the course of Yom Tiv, you bring this shlamim. So we're going to see the first 2 are absolutely obligatory. So Olas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagigah. The last one is optional. Is optional, and we'll discuss that further in Meretz Hashem today. So remember again, the Machlokes in the Mishnah was the value of the Olas Re'iyah versus the Shalmei Simcha. I should say the Shalmei Chagigah, excuse me. So again, you have a Beis Shammai saying the Olas Re'iyah has to be 2 silver pieces, Shalmei Chagigah 1 silver piece, versus Beis Hillel saying that halacha, just the opposite. Right? The Olas Re'iyah worth 1 silver piece, the Shalmei Chagigah worth 2 silver pieces. So it gets into a fundamental issue as to which one is considered to be the more important carbon, right? That's the fundamental question. Which one is of greater importance? So again, we're kind of in the middle of this raging machlokes over here. How do you determine primary importance? So says the Gemara, so remember again, one of the ways that we wanted to show, at least according to Beis Shammai, that the Olas Re'iyah was more important was how? Because it was offered up by Har Sinai. So it was offered up, there was an Olas Re'iyah that was offered up even before Matan Torah itself. So says the Gemara, V'ha Rabbi Yossi Haglili da Amar Ola Shekrivi Yisrael Midbar, Olas Tamid Havi. But yet, we have Rabbi Yossi Haglili who said that Halacha L'Maisa, the Ola that was offered up by the Midbar, right, before Matan Torah, ultimately again was the Tamid. So the Gemara says, but how could that be? Meikar by Hefshef v'nituach lo asol by Hefshef v'nituach. One of the issues we had with labeling the Ola of Har Sinai as the Tamid was what? Was the fact that carbon by Har Sinai did not require skinning and dismembering, whereas the carbon tamid in general does require skinning and dismembering. So the Gemara says, "Decided be'osekli omer ola sheik rivu yisaba midbar ino tuna hefshev nituach lefi shein hefshev nituach ela me'ol moed ve'elach." So I'll say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yossi said that Allah Lamaisa, the Ola by Har Sinai did not require hefshet v'nituach because the din of hefshet v'nituach was only a din from Oel Moed and on. To which the Gemara says, you're right, Sami Mikan Rabbi Yishmael. Take Rabbi Yishmael out of this. So in other words, remember again, we wanted originally to include Rabbi Yishmael amongst the list of opinions who said that the Ola by Har Sinai was an Olas Re'iyah. So now the Gemara is suggesting remove him from that list because it's possible that Rabbi Shmuel actually holds that the Ola by Har Sinai was in fact the Karban Tamid. Fine. So by Rav Chisda, so Rav Chisda says, Haikra Hechi Ksiv. Shabbos says, remember again, this whole discussion about the Ola by Har Sinai focuses on one central pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Vayishlach es narei b'nei Yisrael bayalu olos kvasim vayizbichu zvachim shlamim lashem parim. Shabbos say, we're going to see now there are two ways to read this pasuk. So the Torah says, right, he sent, Moshe Rabbeinu sent the young men of Bnei Yisrael, and they offered up olos kvasim, olos that came from sheep. They offered up zvachim shlamim lashem parim. So I will say, here's the shaila. The simple, it could be the way to read the pasuk is like this. They're offering up two karbanos, olos and shlamim. So you can read it as the olos came from kvasim, came from sheep, and the shlamim came from parim, from oxen. Is that how you read it? O dilma idi v'idi parim. Or maybe Rabbi said the word parim at the end of the pasuk goes back both to shlamim and olos. So maybe both items came from parim. To which the Gemara says, to be honest, lamai nafkamina, what does it matter? In other words, we'll say this is a historical event. So what is it? I mean, I guess it matters in order to know the pasuk, but lamaisa halacha lamaisa, what does it matter? Marzutra amar lepisuk ta'amim. So Marzutra says, well, it will impact the trop. How you read the pasuk ultimately again is parim, a modifier on the entire pasuk or just the last phrase. Ultimately, again, will impact the trop. That's number one. And Ravacha Breid Rava Amar the Omer Harei Alai Ola Kol Shek Rivi Yisrael Midbar. Shabbos say the other possibility is listen to this. So Ravacha Breid Rava says, let's say a person makes a neder, and they say, I hereby take upon myself to bring an Ola like the Ola that was brought in Har Sinai. So someone says that. So Shabbos say, so what happens? Mai. So what kind of carbon is he obligated to bring? Do we say parim avu? Do we say he has to bring parim? Oh, kvasim, or is it sheep? To which the Gemara says teku. Okay, so I'll say, so the only reason this is brought up is because remember again there was such a hyper focus on this pasuk, so the Gemara just brought up this kasha. Tanan Hasam, Eila Rambam say this is a beautiful Gemara. Eila dvarim she'en lam shir. Shabbos say the Gemara quotes the Mishnah in Maseches Peah, who's opening Mishnah Maseches Peah. We just had this in Mishnah Yomi just a few weeks ago. Say Eila dvarim she'en lam shir. These are the following things that have no shear. So in other words, Rabbi said they have no set amount. What are they? Top of Zayin, Hapeya. So Rabbi says, so remember again, those of us learning Mishnah Yomi, we are knee deep in Peya. Right? So remember again, Peya, right? So Rabbi says, so again, so halacha l'maisa Peya, which is the obligation to go ahead and leave a corner of your field. Interestingly enough, does not have a specific shear. Now Rashi says over here, top Rashi, Zayin Amud Aleph, Lo nitna bo Torah shir, b'afal pi she'en lepeya shir, naslu bo chacham shir achas mishishin. Now, we saw in the Mishnah is that even though, again, there is no biblical shir for peya, Chazal went ahead and said you should leave at least 1/60th of your field. Okay, but peya doesn't have a shir. Bikurim, first fruit. Both say, I know that I have to bring my first fruit from the 7 species to the Beis HaMikdash, give it to the Kohen, but Torah doesn't tell me what? How much? How much? There's no shear. So I will say, Re'ayon. So again, we're going to assume right now that what Re'ayon means is your Olas Re'iyah Shalmei Chagigah. That's all. Let's assume that for a moment. Re'ayon, or at least Olas Re'iyah, Gemilos Chasadim. It's beautiful. Chesed. Chesed has no shear. V'Talmud Torah and learning. I'll just show you a beautiful Tosis. Tosis says over Gemilas Chasadim, B'Yerushalmi Hadatema Begufo Aval B'Mamono Yesh Lo Shir. So I'll say, so remember again, when do we say that Chesed has no shear? That's Chesed you perform with your body, right? So visiting the sick, right? Going ahead and doing nice things for people. Monetary Chesed, i.e. tzedakah, does have a shear. What's the halacha? The halacha is you're not supposed to give away what? More than 1/5 of your wealth, more than a 20th of your wealth. There are exceptions to that rule. Post can bring down if a person is Baruch Hashem, incredibly wealthy, so that giving away 1/5 of their wealth is not going to impact them, then Allah when is permitted to do this. So Tosa just points out over here, the Gemilas Chasadim being referred to over here is what we call Gemilas Chasadim Begufo, that you do with your body, but not b'mamono. So we'll say, watch this. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, kisvurin anu lomar hareayon en lo shir lemalo, aval yesh lo shir lemata. Now we'll say, remember again, we're assuming over here that reayon means at least the olas re'iyah, potentially both the Olas Re'iyah as well as Shalmei Chagigah. So Rabbi Yochanan said like this: we originally thought that what this means is the karbanos for Aliyah L'Regel have no ceiling, but they have a floor. In other words, there's got to be a minimum value to the karbanos you bring. But when the Mishnah says Ein Lo Shir, what it means is there's no maximum value. There's no ceiling to it. Ad Sheba Raboshia Berebi V'Limeid Hareayon Ein Lo Shir Lo Lamala V'Lo Lamata. Until Raboshia came along and he said, no, the Reayon has no shear. There's no ceiling and there's no floor. Which I will say is interesting, which sounds like the karbanos, Olas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagigah, have no minimum value and have no maximum value. Ad Aval Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say no, Ha'Re'iyah Ma'a Kesef, V'Chagigah Shtei Kesef. Chachamim said ultimately again that the Olas Re'iyah has to be one silver piece and the Chagigah has to be at least two. Says the Gemara, my hareayon. By the way, what does it mean, the reayon? So we'll say, so it's interesting. So first, the Gemara obviously operates under the assumption that reayon means what? The karbanos you bring when you come for the mitzvah of re'iyah. So what are the karbanos you bring when you come for the mitzvah? The obligatory karbanos, olas re'iyah, shalmei chagigah. Now the Gemara says, by the way, I don't know. What does that word mean? Re'ayon, I will say, this is absolutely incredible. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Re'iyas Panim Ba'azara. This is incredible. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Re'ayon does not mean Olas Re'iyah. It means the mitzvah of coming to see the Beis HaMikdash. Nothing to do with karbanos, not nothing to do, but not specifically referring ultimately to bringing karbanos, but rather the mitzvah of coming to the Beis HaMikdash. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Re'iyas Panim Ba'azara. Rashi says, Kama Pamim Shu Chafetz Ba Umara Atzmo Ba'azara Ve'in Tzarech Lahavi Karban B'chol Re'iyah U'Re'iyah. So let's listen to this. So Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha l'maisa, over the course of Yom Tov, you could come to the Beis HaMikdash as many times as you would like. And you are not obligated to bring a karban every single time you come. In other words, Rabbi say, what we're going to see now is something very interesting. You might have thought that over the course of Yom Tov, we're talking about now specifically Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, there's a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel. So you might have thought that every single time you show up to the Beis HaMikdash over the course of Yom Tov, what do you have to bring? Maybe an Olas Re'iyah and Shalmei Chagigah, or at least an Olas Re'iyah. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no. When the Mishnah says that the Re'ayon is one of the things that doesn't have a shear, what that means is you could come to the Beis HaMikdash as many times as you would like over Yom Tov, and you have to bring a karban once, but you don't have an obligation to bring a karban every single time. Reish Lakish Amar Re'iyas Panim B'Karban. Listen to this. Reish Lakish says, no, you have to bring a karban. It says Re'ayon Ein Lo Shir. It means as many times as you come to the Beis HaMikdash, I will say every single time you come, you have to what? Bring a karban. Pretty incredible. And a pretty expensive proposition as well. So we'll say, so now watch this. Here's the machlokes. Tikule alma lo pligi b'diriyas panim b'karban. So we'll say, listen, I'm sorry. Be'ikar haregal kule alma lo pligi b'diriyas panim. So we'll say, ikar regal. Ikar regal means the first day of Yom Tov. First day of Yom Tov, everyone agrees that when you show up, what do you have to show up with? Olas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagigah. Right? That everyone is agreeing with. What's the machlokes? Ki pligi b'shar yemos haregel. See, Rabbi saying, so everyone's agreeing on day number one. When you show up, showing up requires bringing a karban. But at the end of the day, the machlokes is the rest of the days of Yom Tov. Ki pligi b'shar yemos haregel. Kol heicha da'asa v'asa. Rabbi say that's the machlokes. When you show up the rest of the days of Yom Tov, do you have to bring a karban? Rabbi Yochanan says no, you don't have to bring a karban. Only have to bring a karban day number one. Reish Lakish says no. Bring a karban each and every time you show up. Now watch this. The Gemara says furthermore, furthermore, everyone agrees that whenever you show up, if you do bring a karban, of course we accept that karban from you. So keep pligi. Rabbi say, so where's the machlok? So say, so let's go with what everybody agrees with. Everyone agrees, day one, you have to bring a karban. Everyone also agrees that what? Any other day that you show up and you bring a karban, what? Beis HaMikdash will accept it from you. What's the machlokes? Ki pligi da asav lo aisi. The machlokes is, what happens if you show up on one of the days of Yom Tiv and you don't bring a carbon with you? You don't bring a carbon. Rabbi Yochanan Savar, Iyas Panim Ba'azara, D'chol Emas Dasil Tzarech Lasuye. So Rabbi Yochanan holds that halacha l'maisa. You only have to bring a carbon day one. And the rest of the days that you show up without a carbon, totally fine. You don't need a carbon to show up. Reish Lakish Amar, Riyas Panim B'Karban, D'chol Emas Da'asi Tzarech Lasuye. Reish Lakish, on the other hand, says, no, the obligation of Re'iyah applies all the days of Yom Tiv, and therefore any day of Yom Tiv that you show up, you must come with karbanos. So I will say, really a fascinating machlokes. So again, in version 1 of the machlokes, everyone's in agreement about day 1, obligation to bring a carbon. Everyone is also in agreement that any of the other days, if you do show up and bring a carbon, Beis Hamikdash will accept it. When we say carbon, we're specifically again referring to Olas Re'iyah, Shamei Chagigah. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is, do you have to bring a carbon every day of Yom Tiv you show up? Rabbi Yochanan says no. Reish Lakish says yes. I will say, by the way, if you think about it, what a fundamental life machlokes as well. We'll see. You saw this life machlokes is. Is it enough in life just to show up, or do you actually have to do something as well? Rabbi Yochanan will say it's enough to show up. Showing up sometimes is the most important thing you could do. Reish Lakish says showing up is nice, but showing up and doing nothing, showing up with no carbon, showing up with no self-sacrifice, showing up without being invested in it is never enough. But I will say, interestingly enough, according to this approach, they both agree that at least for one day, you got to show up and do a bit more. Right? On Dinah Rowan, you got to show up and bring charos. Remember again, a carbon represents giving something of oneself. A carbon represents ultimately, again, a little bit of self-sacrifice. So an incredible yisod. No one ever says that all you have to ever do is just show up. Everyone's going to agree that showing up is important, but at some point in time, you got to do something additional. But the shaila is, do you have to do something additional each day? Rabbi Yochanan says no. Most of life, showing up is enough. Reish Lakish says no. No. Showing up is a great first start, but showing up is only meaningful if accompanied by a carbon. So incredible. So Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish raised the kasha to Rabbi Yochanan, very exciting Gemara. Reish Lakish says, the pasuk says, V'lo yira'u panai rekam. Pasuk says, Hashem says to us, when you come to my house, don't show up empty-handed, right? You don't show up without a hostess gift, right? Or, without a housewarming gift, something. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, don't come to my house empty-handed. So Reish Lakish said, Rabbi Yochanan, it's a pretty good raya, that's what? That when you show up to the Beis Hamikdash over the course of Yom Tiv, you better come with a carbon. Amar lei be'ikar haregal. So Rabbi Yochanan says, come on, Reish Lakish, you know the answer to that. That pasuk is referring to the first day of Yom Tiv. It's not referring to the duration of Yom Tiv. Yeah, remember again, even Rabbi Yochanan is agreeing, first day of Yom Tiv, don't show up empty-handed. Eisvei has another kasha, v'lo yira'u panei rekam, don't come empty-handed, bizvachim ata omer. This is talking about by karbanas. So the Gemara says, ata omer bizvachim wa ina ela ba'ofos u'menachos. How do you know it's karbanas? Maybe it's birds or meal offerings. Remember, when we speak about zvachim, it means what? Animals. How do you know it means animals? Maybe it's enough to show up with a karban mincha meal offering or with a bird offering. V'dinhu. What's the kal v'chomer? Ne'emra chagigah lahajot v'ne'emar re'iyah legavoah. The karban chagigah, I will say, is a shlamim, and therefore it's primarily benefits a person, right? And ultimately, again, re'iyah, the olas re'iyah, is an olah, goes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ma chagigah ha'amur lehedyot zvachim, just like the chagigah, the shalmi chagigah that we have are animals. Af re'iyah ha'amura legavoah. Ultimately, so to the olas re'iyah has to be an animal as well. So the Gemara says, Uma hein zvachim olos. Umahin zvachim olos ata omer olos ena el shlamim. So what's the animal you're offering up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You're telling me it's an olah. How do you know it's an olah? So the Gemara says maybe it's a shlamim. V'dinhu ne'amra chagigah lahajot v'ne'amra re'iyah legavoah. It says chagigah for an individual and re'iyah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chagigah ha'amura lehedjot bara'oilo. Just like Rabbi say, the Chagigah, which is utilized by people, is something that is useful for people, i.e. a shlamim, from which the owners get to consume the meat. Afri'iyah ha'amura legavoa bara'oilo. So to the olas ri'iyah. The olas ri'iyah, which ultimately, again, is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is something that is quote-unquote fit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will say, what's fit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Ultimately an olah, right? An animal that is fully consumed in the mizbech. V'chein bedin, shelo yeh shulchan chamalei, v'shulchan rabcha rekam. So too, again, it makes sense. It shouldn't be that your table is filled with meat and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is empty. So therefore, if I'm going to have a Chagigah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have his olah. Amrlei, to which again Rabbi Yochanan responds, Bikra haregel. Rish Lakish, you're right. But we're talking about the obligation over here. When we speak about the obligation to bring karbanos, it's referring to the first day of Yom Tov. And even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that on day number 1 of Yom Tov, when you show up in the Beis HaMikdash, don't show up empty-handed. Show up with your Ola Asriya and your Shami Chagigah. Se'eis Veidim Marais the Kasha, Rabbi Yochanan, Eis Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, Omer, Shalosh Regalim Bashana, Nitztavu Yisrael Lalos Berega. 3 regalim of the year, Klal Yisrael was commanded to come up to Yerushalayim. What are they? B'chag HaMatzos, U'b'chag HaShavuos, U'b'chag HaSukos. Ve'ein Nira Chatzoin. The Bryce is going to say a couple of things here which are quite interesting. Ein Nira Chatzoin means literally, Chatzoin literally means what? Halves. Rashi explains over here in this context what it means is chaburos, groups. You don't come to the Beis HaMikdash in groups. We'll see what that means. Mishum shenemar kol zechorcha, because the pasuk says all of your males. Ve'in nir and rekanin. You also don't show up empty-handed. Mishum shenemar v'lo yirau panai rekam. Because we'll say the pasuk says, do not show up empty-handed. Right? Do not come to see my face empty-handed. So we'll say, so once again, the Gemara is raising all of these kashas on Rabbi Yochanan, because the Gemara is assuming that when the Brisa says don't show up empty-handed, it means don't show up empty-handed when? All of Yom Tov. And Rabbi Yochanan always gives the same answer. Amarlei, be'ikr haregel. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, when the Brisa uses this lashon of don't show up empty-handed, that's referring to day 1 of Yom Tov. And day 1 of Yom Tov, everyone agrees, don't show up empty-handed. Rabbi Yochanan raised the question. So I'll say now we're turning the tables. Up until now, the questions have all been directed against Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that what? That Allah Chalamaysi, you have to bring karbanos the first day. But for the rest of Yom Tiv, if you want to, we'll accept it from you. But you don't have to bring karbanos over the course of the rest of Yom Tiv. And that's why when the Mishnah said that Re'ayon doesn't have a shear, what is that referring to according to Rabbi Yochanan? That you could show up in the Mikdash as much as you want over the course of Yom Tiv. But a carbon is only obligatory and necessary on day number 1. Now we're switching the tables. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is Kasha to Reish Lakish. Yir'eh Yeira'eh. So we'll say, remember again, this is the concept. This is a pasuk. We quoted this drush of Yir'eh Yeira'eh, that Hashem comes to be seen the way He sees. So we spoke about this already by the exemption of a blind person from Aliyah L'Regel. But here we'll say, here's a different drasha. Ma'ani b'chinam, af ato b'chinam. It was actually quite beautiful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, just like I come to see you without a charge, so you could come to see me without a charge. In other words, that Rabbi Yochanan is saying over here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says there's no prerequisite, right, that I have to coming to see you. There's no prerequisite that you have to coming to see me. So Rabbi Yochanan uses this as a raya, right? Avatam bechinam. Ella kol heicha da'asa v'lo aisavos. So therefore again, Rabbi Yochanan uses this as a way to show, while it is true that there is an obligation to bring a carbon on day 1, for the rest of Yom Tiv, halacha l'maisa, you come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu just showing up without any need for any karbanos. Quite beautiful. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, fine. So rather the Gemara says, Ella, first white line, Ella, kol heicha da'asa v'lo aisi, say, in a situation where a person comes to the Beis HaMikdash didn't bring karbanos, to kuli alma, lo pligi da'ayel umischazi v'nofik. So Rabbi says, so everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, if you showed up over the course of Yom Tiv, and you did not bring a karban, so ultimately, again, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Re'iyah. Ki pligi, so I'll say, where's the machlokes? Da'asa va'aisi. Where ultimately, again, I will say, so here's what's fascinating. See, I will say, in this version, right, in version number 1, everyone agreed that you have to bring a karban on day 1. Everyone also agreed that if you bring karbanos over the course of Yom Tiv, we'll accept them from you. The machlokes is one obligated to bring additional olas shami chagigah every single time you show up? Rabbi Yochanan said no, Reish Lakish said yes. Rabbi say in this version, the machlokes is a little bit different. In this version, everyone is agreeing that after day 1, if you show up without karbanos, you're good. You're good. You're totally good to go, right? Because again, you show up, and you fulfill the mitzvah of re'iyah, of re'ayon, right? Without a karban. So what's the machlokes? So we'll say this is incredible. Ki pligi da'asa va'aisi. Rabbi say, watch this. This is fascinating. In this version, the machlokes is what happens if you showed up on days 2 through 7, right? Or days 2 through by Pesach, or days 2 through 8 on Sukkot, and you decided after day 1 to bring an additional olas riyah shami chagigah. Will we accept it from you? Will the Beis Hamikdash accept additional olos riyah shami chagigah? Rabbi Yochanan da amar riyas panim ba'azara riyas panim hu de'in lashir halakarban yeshir. Wow. Rabbi Yochanan says that when the Mishnah in Peah says re'ayon doesn't have a shear, what is that referring to? That's referring to coming to the Beis Hamikdash, you showing up. Show up as much as you want. But karbanos do have a shear. There's one olas riyah and one shami chagigah per customer. And once you go ahead and bring your olas riyah and shami chagigah on day 1, you're done. You're done. And if you try to bring more olas riyah and shami chagigah over the course of Yom Tov, what's going to happen? The Beis Hamikdash will not accept it from you. Now, I both say, I want to be clear. If you want to bring additional karbanos to the Beis Hamikdash over the course of Yom Tov, can you do so? Yes. Remember again, what can you bring? Nidarim, nidavos. What Rabbi Yochanan is saying over here is just in a very specific capacity. Olas re'iyah, shami chagigah are brought at the beginning of Yom Tov. And once you fulfill that obligation, you're done. They will say, why can't you bring more? According to Rabbi Yochanan, why can't you bring more? What's the problem? They will say, it's the same problem of doing more than the required amount of any mitzvah, right? They will say, if you go ahead and you put on 3 pairs of tefillin at once, right? That's Baal Tosef. You go ahead and you decide to add roses to your daled minim, right? To your lulav esrog. You're not content with a datzon ravos. You like color. You like color, right? So you decide to add a little bit of color. You're not allowed to do that. So Rabbi Yochanan will say it's the same. The halacha of olas riyah shami chagigah is you bring it on the first day and then you're done. You can't bring more. That's it. You're done. So if you show up with another olas riyah shami chagigah on day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of Yom Tov, Beis Hamikdash will say, no, thank you. Thank you so much. Beautiful. A for effort, but no thank you. And when the Mishnah in Peah says that re'ayon has no shear, that means for showing up. Come as many times as you want, but lamaisa karbanos, ultimately you're capped at 1 olas riyah, 1 shami chagigah. On the other hand, Reish Lakish amar riyas panim b'karban. Reish Lakish says no. Halacha lamaisa, when it says re'ayon doesn't have a shear, that means karbanos. Bring as many olos riyah and shami chagigah as you want. Afilu karban nami ein lashir. Even the karban itself, Reish Lakish will say halacha lamaisa does not have a shear. Does not have a shear. We'll see. All right, we'll see interesting halacha in just a moment. Fine. So we'll say, so this is the so we'll say, see what's happening over here? In second version of the machlokes, still everyone is agreeing, primary obligation on day number 1. The machlokes now is, if you want to bring additional karbanos over the course of, everyone also agrees that if you show up without karbanos over the course of Yom Tiv, that's fine as well, that you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Re'iyah. The shaila is if you want to bring additional olos Re'iyah, shami chagigah, can you do so? Rabbi Yochanan says no. Reish Lakish says yes. So it says the Gemara, here we go, Eisvei, Hokar Raglecha, Mi Beis Reyacha. So I will say this is fascinating. This pasuk is from Mishlei. Hokar Raglecha Mi Beis Reyacha. And I will say, Hokar is literally, again, a lashon of yakar, right? Expensive, which literally means make the walking of your feet in the house of Hashem something expensive, which I will say means something amazing. Diminish the number of times or the amount of time you spend walking in the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I will say, now what does that mean? The HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to visit, so Chazal understand it to mean as follows. Diminish the number of karbanos you bring. That's how the Gemara is interpreting this pasuk. Hoker raglocha mi beis reyacha. Diminish the amount of times you have to walk in the house of Hashem, which means diminish the number of karbanos you're going to bring. So Rabbi says, so now remember again, this is Rabbi Yochanan asking on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, you say, every single time you shop in the Beis HaMikdash over the course of Yom Tiv, you bring an olas v'yashami Chagigah. But look at the pasuk. The pasuk says, diminish the amount of karbanos you bring. Reish Lakish will say, come on, you know what that means. Hasam. Bechatos uva'ashamos k'derebi Levi. The Rebbe Levi, Rabbi Ksiv Hokarag l'chami beis reyacha, uksiv avo beisecha ba'olos lokashya, kan bechatos va'ashamos, kan ba'olos shabos. Say, here's the difference. When do we say diminish the amount of karbanos? You know what that refers to? You know what that refers to? Sin offerings. And what does it mean to diminish your offerings? What does it mean? What does it mean? Sin less. They both say solid advice, by the way. Solid advice. And by the way, not subject to machlokes, right? Everyone agrees. Sin less. Sin less. So yes, there's nothing that makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu more happy than less chataos va'ashamos. Less sin offerings. So therefore, again, Rish Lakish will say, when the pasuk says, Hoker raglocha mi beis reyacha, diminish the number of karbanos you bring, that's about sin offerings. But conversely, when the pasuk says, Avo beisecha ba'olos, I'll come to your house, Hashem, with olos, that's referring to what? That's referring to olos and shlamim. When it's non-sin offerings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is happy to have as much as we're willing to bring. Therefore, Reish Lakish says, if you're going to shop with additional olas re'iyah, shami chagigah, that's fantastic. When does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell us to diminish our sacrificial traffic? That's by sin offerings. Incredible. Time Nachar so that supports this. When the pasuk says, diminish your karbanos, that's talking about sin offerings. You say it means sin offerings. Maybe it means olos and shlamim. Kishu omer avo beisecha. When the pasuk says, I will come to your home. Ba'olos ashalim l'chanei darai. Hari olos u'shlamim amar hamani makayim. Hoker raglocha mi beis re'echa. Bechatos v'asharos chasam adavas. So therefore, both say, but the Gemara just points out over here is you have competing psukim. You have some psukim that seem to indicate that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves when you bring karbanos, and other pasuk Hoker raglocha mi beis re'echa that seems to indicate that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to diminish our sacrificial traffic. To which the Gemara says it's not a contradiction. When does Hashem want me to diminish my sacrificial traffic? When that's halacha l'maisa, chataos and hashamos, sin offerings. When does He want me to increase my sacrificial traffic? Pretty much by everything else, right? That's more voluntary. So both say, so how do we paskin? So say there's a lot of machlokes happening over here. First of all, so the machlokes is Sham Betzalel, right? In terms of the value olas riyah versus shami chagigah. Now I also have this additional machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, namely about bringing of olas riyah and shami chagigah over the course of the rest of Yom Tiv. Everyone will say, what does everyone agree on? What does everyone agree on? Day one, you have to bring olas riyah shami chagigah. Shailas, what about the rest of it? So I'll share with you two pieces from the Rambam. First piece from the Rambam. Hilchos chagigah, perek aleph halacha beis. Hariyah v'chagigah ein lahem shir min HaTorah. So both say, so first of all, interestingly enough, the way the Rambam understands the Mishnah and Peah is that when the Mishnah says that Re'iyah and Chagigah don't have a shear, it means the value. So there is no minimum or maximum value for the Olas, Re'iyah, and Shami Chagigah. This is true midaraisa. No maximum or minimum value. Aval, Medivrei Sofrim, Shalei Hei Karban Olas Re'iyah Pachos Mishvei Ma'a Kasef. V'lo shami Chagigah pachos mishvei shtei kesef. Rabbi say the Rambam paskins like Beis Hillel, namely the olas re'iyah has to midrabanon has to be worth a minimum of 1 silver piece, and the shami Chagigah a minimum of 2 silver pieces. So Rabbi says that's number 1. Feels good, right? No, the Chazal tell us, "Ein simcha kataras asveikos." There's no greater happiness in life than the resolution of doubt. You read these Gemaras, and then you feel it, right? Like your kishkas are in a knot, because I don't know who does the halacha follow, right? I don't know what to do. Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt, and I know that I have a little bit of time until Pesach still, but still, I want to know what to do. I want to know what to build. And Baruch Hashem, the Rambam always comes to our rescue. Rambam's like our best friend in the world. You have that friend who, when you have a complex issue, you come to them and they help you work it through. Everybody needs a friend like that, right? A close friend, a spouse, someone like that who can help me with that. The Rambam's like our friend, right? You go through a sugya, my kishkas are not because I don't know what the halacha is, and my friend, my best friend in the world, the Rambam comes along and just lays it straight out. So, right, halacha pass like Beis Hillel. So, olas re'iyah worth 1 silver, 1 piece of silver. Shami Chagigah worth 2 pieces of silver. But the Rambam does add in, he says, u'mitzvah lahavi kefi ashro. The mitzvah ever is to bring the olas re'iyah and shami Chagigah in accordance with your wealth. So those are minimums, not maximums. So at a minimum, olas re'iyah, 1 silver piece, shami Chagigah, 2 silver pieces, but bring more if you could, but bring more expensive if you could afford more expensive. Next Rambam, listen to this. Rabbi say this is in Parak Beis Halacha Vav. Misha ba la'azar b'sochi me'achag eno chayiv lahavi ola biado b'chol eis sheikanes. Rabbi say halacha ma'asifas like Rabbi Yochanan. You don't have to bring an olas re'iyah every single time you come to the Beis Hamikdash over the course of Yom Tov. So that's step 1. I don't have to. But what's the next shaila? Can I? Watch this. So therefore the Rambam says because the obligation to bring an olas re'iyah is only on the first day. However, v'mhevi b'chol eish yavi mekablin mimenu umakrivin oso l'shem olas re'iyah. But Rabbi say, so we paskin like the second version of Rabbi Yochanan, namely, second version of Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi say, this is halacha l'maisa. Second version of Rabbi Yochanan, namely what? The halacha l'maisa are only obligated to bring the olas re'iyah 1 time a Yom Tiv, but I can bring as many olos re'iyah as I want over the course of Yom Tiv. So bring as many as you want, and as many as you bring, the Beis Hamikdash ultimately again will accept it. Why says the Rambam? Shahariyah ein la shir. So I will say the Rambam paskins then the Mishnah and Peah, when it refers to re'ayon refers to what? The olas re'iyah. You could bring as many olos re'iyah as you want, but you're only obligated to bring 1. So Rambam paskins like, so I will say for halacha l'maisa 2 important pieces of halacha. L'maisa moed paskin like Beis Hillel. Therefore, olas re'iyah worth 1 silver piece, shami Chagigah worth 2 silver pieces. Rambam paskins like the second version of Rabbi Yochanan, namely again, only have an obligation to bring an olas re'iyah first day of Yom Tiv, but can bring as many as you want over the course of Yom Tiv. Beautiful. Abba says, go weiter. The Gemara goes on. Ve'ein not near in chatzon. So remember again, the Brisa said, you can't appear in groups. What does that mean? Sarah Yosef Lamemar Man Deistei Sarah Banim Lo Liske Idne Chamisha Ulamachar Chamisha. Shabbos say Pashtos. The Gemara said, what does that mean? Maybe that means someone who has 10 sons. Someone who has 10 sons shouldn't go ahead and bring 5 of them today and 5 of them tomorrow, thereby causing 5 of them to lose out on olas re'iyah on the first day. Amar Lei said to him, Amar Beis, Amar Lei Abaye, Pshita. That's kind of obvious. Hey minayu mashvis lahu poshim, ve'hei minayu mashvis lahu's reason. Shabbos said it's very interesting. Of course, if a person has 10 sons, you can't decide to bring 5 of them on day 1 and 5 of them on day 2. Why? Because the 5 that you don't bring, how are you going to choose which ones are potion, which ones are sinners, and which ones are reason? Right? Maybe you could pick them out, right? I'll say, but lemaisa, again, interesting enough about saying that again. It can't be that we're talking about you can't bring your own family in groups, right? I will say, why not? Because everybody is obligated to do what? To show up on day 1. So obviously, we'll say, I'll just point out to you how interesting it is when the Gemara wants to contrast 2 groups. There's Zrizin and Potion. So they're opposite. So we'll say Potion, right? A Poshea is a sinner. I would have thought, what's the opposite of a sinner? I don't know, I would have thought it's a tzaddik, right? I would have thought poshin tzaddikim. It's interesting, by the way, how the Gemara understands that the opposite of a sinner is a zoriz. I will say, what does a zoriz mean? Zoriz means alacritous, right? Alacritous, someone who does everything with zeal. See, Rabbi will say, the opposite of chait is not mitzvah. The opposite of chait is zrizos. Because Rabbi will say, if you think about this, it's such a profound yesod, which is the reason we often get ourselves into trouble most of the time is because we don't jump on the opportunities of life. Is because we're a bit too relaxed, right? A bit too laid back, and sometimes, dare I say, even a bit lazy. A bit lazy. And so when I'm a bit too laid back, and a little bit too lazy, and I don't jump on life opportunities, that's what leads to hate. We're good. I was saying, Jews are good. We're good, right? And we're holy people, and we want to do the right thing. So therefore, again, I'm either a poshea or I'm zoriz, because the opposite of being a poshea, the opposite of being a sinner is not a tzaddik. Because again, I'm not a tzaddik, but I can be a zar. So we'll say such an incredible. Sometimes the secret to success in life is not the avoidance of sin. In other words, I want to avoid sin. I want to go on record as saying avoidance of sin is good. But if there's one thing you know about avoidance of sin, which is, it's never going to be absolute. I'm not going to avoid all averas all the time. So what am I aiming for? So what the Gemara is teaching is, you know what I'm aiming for? Is rizos. It's interesting. That's really what I'm aiming for. Because if I could become a zaris, if I could become an alacritous individual, if I could be a person who, when I do things, I do them now and I do them quickly. If I could be the kind of person who, at the end of the day, when I see an opportunity, I jump on it. I don't wait. I don't say I'll get back to it. I don't say later. I do it, and I do it now. And I seize the opportunities of life as they come my way. If I am a zaris, that's the opposite of being a poshea. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, so who's the group? What does it mean groups? Elo, kralamai asa. We'll say this is great. We saw this before. The Chidachirim. The Sanya. Achirim Omrim. Hamakametz. Vahametzaref nechoshes. Vabur siptrominer. So we had this just a few days ago. I think on Sunday maybe. Monday, right? So we had, again, Makametz is the guy who collects dog excrement with his hands. Or Metzaref nechoshes, right? Goes ahead and... Not a popular job. Metzaref nechoshes, he smelts copper. Or bursi, tanner. Shabbos say, the common denominator amongst all these people are, or is, they smell. Right? So therefore, I will say again, all of these people are patura min ha're'iyah. They are all patur from re'iyah. Shene emar, kol zechorcha. The pasuk says, I will say, who's obligated to be all the regular? Kol zechorcha. What does kol zechorcha mean? Mi sheyach alalos im kol zechorcha. Someone who is able to go ahead and come up with other Jews. Yatsu Eilu Shen Yicholen Lalos in Kol Zechorcha. Shabbos say these individuals, it's very interesting, they're exempt from Aliyah L'Rega. Why? Because they can't come with the group. Shabbos say, and therefore again, when the Mishnah says you can't come up in groups, Shabbos say, you might have thought like this, okay, so I have a great idea. Let the excrement guys, right? Let the dog excrement guys, that chevra, right? Dog excrement chevra, right? The tanners, maybe they have like jackets or something, right? Right? The tanners, right? Let them form their own group. Let them form their own group. To which the Gemara says, no. The Brisa said, Einir in Chatzon. No. It doesn't work that way. You don't come up to the Beis Hamikdash in groups. You come up to the Beis Hamikdash with Kol Zechorcha, which I will say teaches us such an incredible lesson. You know what Cheshbach was teaching us? If you can't come up to the Beis Hamikdash with all of Klal Yisrael, don't come. Don't come. See, Rabbi was saying, if you can only come up to the Beis Hamikdash with your chevra, right? I have my chevra. People who look like me, act like me, behave like me, practice like me, live like me. I have my chevra. I was saying, if all you could do in your Yiddishkeit is surround yourself with people who are just like you, then you're not part of Klal Yisrael. Then you're part of a chevra. Okay, it's very nice to have a chevra. Beautiful to have a chevra. But you can't come up to Aliyah L'Regel with your chevra. You have to come up, you have to be Ola Regel with Klal Yisrael. And if you don't know how to be part of Klal Yisrael, if you don't smell right, and you can't be part of Klal Yisrael, Cheshbon who says, I love you, but you don't have to come. You don't have to come. I'm looking for Klal Yisrael, Jews will say. What an incredible Yisod. And what our avoda is, being part of the Klal. to learn how to get along and to live side by side with all of Klal Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want groups. He doesn't want factions. He wants a nation. Let's go back there. Says the Mishnah. Olos b'moed ba'os minachulim. Both say this is a great sugya, which at least we'll get to start today. Olos b'moed ba'os minachulim. Shabbos, listen to this. When you bring olos on Cholamai, now we'll say now bepashtos, olos is referring to olas re'iyah. That's what we're assuming. So your olos that you bring even on Cholamai have to come from chulin. V'ashlamim min ha'maiser. Shlamim Rabosai, Shlamim we're assuming again means Shamei Simcha. Again, come from Maiser. Let me give you one word of backdrop to this. The halacha is, when you have an obligation to do something, you can't bring an obligation, you can't satisfy an obligation from already consecrated funds. Obligations have to be satisfied from chulin funds. So for example, again, I have an obligation to bring an olas re'iyah. I can't use tzedakah money for that. Or I can't use, in this case, Meiser Sheni money for that. That has to come from Chulin. However, Shlamim, we're going to see which Shlamim we're referring to, can come from Meiser Sheni money. But remember again, what's Meiser Sheni? Meiser Sheni is the tithe that I have to take. I'm the Jewish farmer. I have to take it, but it's mine, right? I just have to bring it to Yerushalayim and use it to purchase food in Yerushalayim. So I could use my Meiser Sheni money to buy Shlamim. We'll see which Shlamim. Yom Tov Rishon Shal Pesach, on the first Yom Tov of Pesach, Beishamai Omrim Minachulin. Your olas riyah has to come from chulin. Ubeisila Omrim Mina Meiser. Beisila says it could even come from Meiser, Shina. But see again, the Gemara will frame exactly what this means. Yisroel Yol Tidei Chavasam Ben Adam Ben Adavas Ube Meiser Behema. Jewish rights or Jews can be yod say their obligation with nedarim and nedavos. So we'll say we're going to see ultimately what this means is there's an obligation to have meat over the course of Yom Tiv, Simcha. You could fulfill your mitzvah of simcha with nedarim, nedavas, meiser sheni or meiser behema, kohanim bechatos, vashamos, bebechar, bechazeh, beshok, avalo ba'ovos, u'menachos. Similarly, kohanim could fulfill their mitzvah on Yom Tiv, ultimately again, with meat from a chatos, from an asham, from a bechar, from the thigh, from the chest, but not with bird offerings and not with meal offerings. So also, we'll stop over here for today. Tomorrow we're going to pick up on the really incredible sugya, but halacha l'maisa, what type of funds can be used to satisfy what type of obligations. I'll just mention, just in passing, this is very important, why this shaila comes up all the time. When people want to know, I have meiser money, tzedakah money, what types of things can I use meiser money or tzedakah money for? Abosai, that's going to be this sugya to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach.